I'm sorry, but we don't accommodate situations like yours. I stared at the real estate agent, my heart sinking into my stomach. His eyes held such contempt, as if I'd committed some terrible crime just by walking into his office. My hand instinctively moved to my belly. Only 3 months along. But maybe he could tell, or perhaps he'd seen the medical forms I'd filled out. The ones that clearly stated my condition. But I have the money ready, I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound confident. The deposit, first and last month's rent, everything you asked for. The air conditioning hummed loudly in the cramped office. Yet sweat beaded on my forehead. This was Tribeca, one of New York City's most expensive neighborhoods. And this apartment represented everything I'd been working toward. A safe place. A real home where I could raise my child without fear. Tom, that was his name, printed on the brass nameplate on his desk, slammed the folder shut with unnecessary force. Look, Mr. Javier. We cater to families here. Real families. Your situation doesn't align with our building's standards. His words hit me like a physical blow. Situation? I wasn't sick. I wasn't damaged. I was pregnant and Omega carrying a child, which should have been celebrated, not treated like a shameful secret. My hand pressed more firmly against the small bump, a protective gesture I couldn't suppress. This is discrimination, I whispered, but even I could hear how powerless I sounded. Being an Omega in this city already came with countless challenges. The constant fear of walking alone at night, the suppressants I had to take religiously, the way people looked at me in professional settings, and now, pregnant without an alpha partner? I knew exactly what people thought, what that assumed about me. Tom stood up, gathering his briefcase with a dismissive smile. You're welcome to hire a lawyer if you feel that strongly about it. But I'm not renting to you. Please leave. The door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt deafening. Outside, the Manhattan wind cut across my face. Cold and unforgiving. People rushed past on the sidewalk, absorbed in their own worlds, their own problems. I looked down at the bank statement I'd printed this morning, now crumpled in my shaking hands. 6 months of double shifts at the cafe. 6 months of saving every dollar, skipping meals, walking instead of taking the subway. All for this moment, and now, nothing. I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building, sleek glass windows reflecting the gray November sky, modern architecture that spoke of safety and stability, perfect schools nearby, a park just 2 blocks away, everything I needed, everything my baby deserved. Excuse me, the voice came from behind me, deep and commanding in a way that made my Omega instincts immediately alert. I turned around and my breath caught in my throat. This man was tall, easily over 6 feet, with a sharp jawline and dark hair, styled perfectly despite the wind. But it was his scent that truly affected me. Alpha pheromones, strong and intoxicating, washing over me like a wave. I took an involuntary step backward, my hand moving protectively to my stomach. Are you all right? He asked, and I noticed his eyes, gray like storm clouds, were fixed on my face with genuine concern. I'm fine, I lied. But my voice cracked on the last word. Tears were threatening to spill and I blinked rapidly, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. The stranger glanced at the building, then back at me, and something in his expression softened. I heard everything. I was waiting outside Tom's office for my appointment. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. What he did was wrong. A stranger's kindness was somehow worse than Tom's cruelty. It broke something inside me. Here I was, standing on a New York City street, pregnant, rejected, and completely lost. The reality of my situation crashed over me all at once. I had nowhere to go. My parents had cut me off months ago when they discovered my pregnancy. My small studio apartment's lease was ending in 2 weeks. I was running out of options and running out of time. I just needed a home. I managed to whisper, the words barely audible over the street noise. He started to respond, but his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, frowned at the screen, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. What's your name? Javier, he repeated, and the way he said my name made something flutter in my chest, like it meant something. Like I meant something. I'm Richard. Then he turned and walked back into the building, toward Tom's office, leaving me standing there confused and emotionally drained. Who was this man? Why had he approached me, and why did his presence linger even after he'd gone? His scent still affecting my omega senses in ways I didn't want to acknowledge. I forced myself to start walking, heading toward the subway station. My feet felt heavy, each step an effort. The dream apartment was gone. That much was clear. Now I needed to figure out what came next, and I needed to do it quickly. I had a baby to think about, a baby who deserved better than a mother who couldn't even secure basic housing. As I descended into the subway station, the fluorescent lights harsh and unflattering, I pulled out my phone and opened the apartment hunting apps again. The listings blurred together, all too expensive, all requiring references I didn't have, all subtly or explicitly unwelcoming to single pregnant omegas. My savings account balance glared at me from my banking app, enough for a deposit and maybe 2 months' rent somewhere cheap, somewhere far from Manhattan, somewhere without good schools or safe streets. The train arrived with a screech of metal on metal. I stepped inside, finding a seat in the corner where I could press against the wall and feel somewhat protected. Around me, the city's population flowed and ebbed. Business people in expensive suits, students with backpacks, tired workers heading home after long shifts. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone except me. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Mr. Javier? A woman's voice, professional and crisp. This is Sarah Chen, personal assistant to Richard Reeves. Mr. Reeves would like to meet with you tomorrow morning regarding the Tribeca building. Would 9 o'clock work for you? I sat there stunned as the train rattled through the tunnel. Who is Richard Reeves? She gave me an address, a midtown office building, and confirmed the time before ending the call. I immediately pulled up Google, typing in the name with shaking fingers. Richard Reeves, billionaire real estate developer, Forbes list, philanthropist, one of New York's most successful businessmen under 40, and the man who had spoken to me on the street. I stared at his photo on my phone screen, professional headshot, confident smile, and wondered what a man like that could possibly want with someone like me. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours my entire life was about to change. The skyscraper loomed above me, all glass and steel reaching toward the morning sky. I stood on the sidewalk staring up at the address Sarah Chen had given me, feeling completely out of place. My jacket was old, bought from a thrift store 3 years ago, and my jeans had a small tear near the knee that I tried unsuccessfully to hide. Everyone entering and exiting the building looked like they belonged in a fashion magazine. I took a deep breath and walked through the revolving doors. The lobby was marble and chrome, with a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling. My reflection in the polished floor showed exactly how much I didn't belong here. A security guard directed me to the executive elevators, and I rode up alone, watching the floor numbers climb higher and higher. 70th floor. I'd never been this high in a building before. When the doors opened, a woman in her 30s greeted me with a professional smile. Mr. Javier? I'm Sarah. Mr. Reeves is expecting you. She led me down a hallway lined with expensive artwork and into a conference room that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, the city spread out below like a living map. I could see Central Park in the distance, a green rectangle surrounded by gray buildings. Javier. I turned at the sound of my name. Richard entered the room, and somehow he looked even more imposing than he had yesterday. The suit he wore probably cost more than I made in 3 months. His presence filled the space, and once again I felt the pull of his alpha pheromones, making my omega instincts respond in ways I desperately tried to suppress. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing for me to sit. His smile seemed genuine, which only confused me more. I have something to show you. He slid a folder across the polished conference table. I opened it with trembling hands, expecting I don't know what. A job offer, charity information. Instead, I found property documents, legal papers, and highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the page, new building policy, no discrimination based on gender, secondary gender, pregnancy status, or family structure. All applicants will be evaluated solely on financial qualifications and references. My eyes scanned the document header, the Tribeca building, the same building where Tom had rejected me yesterday. I don't understand, I said, looking up at Richard. He leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes studying my face. I purchased the building last night. The entire property. Tom has been terminated, effective immediately. And the apartment you wanted? It's yours if you still want it. The room seemed to tilt. You bought an entire building? Because of what happened to me. Discrimination is unacceptable, Richard said simply. You deserved better treatment. Your baby deserves a safe home. He paused and something flickered across his face, an emotion I couldn't identify. I meant what I said yesterday. What Tom did was wrong, and I had the means to correct it. I couldn't process this. A billionaire had purchased a multi-million-dollar building because a real estate agent had been cruel to me. It didn't make sense. People like Richard didn't help people like me. That wasn't how the world worked. I can't afford to pay you back, I said, the words tumbling out. Not for something like this. I'm just a cafe worker. I don't have— This isn't about repayment, Richard interrupted gently. This is about doing what's right. He stood and walked to the windows, his hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. However, there is something you could help me with if you're willing to hear me out. My stomach tightened. Here it was. The catch. The real reason he'd done all this. What kind of help? I need a partner, he said, still facing the windows. Publicly, my company is expanding internationally, and I'm in negotiations with several conservative investors. They prefer working with alphas who project stability, married, family-oriented, traditional values. He turned to face me. They see single alphas as risky, unpredictable. I felt my pulse quicken. You want me to pretend to be your partner? A contract arrangement, Richard clarified, moving back to the table. 6 months. You'd accompany me to public events, business dinners, social gatherings. We'd present as a committed couple. In exchange, the apartment is yours rent-free. All your medical expenses are covered and you'd receive a monthly stipend for any needs you or your baby might have. This was insane. A fake relationship with a billionaire? It sounded like something from a romance novel, not real life. But I'm pregnant. Won't that complicate things? To my surprise, Richard smiled. Actually, it makes the arrangement more believable. An alpha supporting his pregnant omega partner? That's exactly the image these investors want to see. It demonstrates commitment, responsibility, family values. I sat back in my chair, trying to think clearly despite the chaos in my mind. This was a business transaction. He needed something from me, and in exchange I'd get security for my baby. No emotions avals. No complications. Just 6 months of playing a role, and then I'd have enough saved to truly start over. What happens after 6 months? I asked. The contract ends. You keep the apartment for a full year regardless, along with the remaining medical coverage for your delivery and postpartum care. We part ways professionally, and you're free to build whatever life you want. It was too good to be true. There had to be a catch, something he wasn't telling me. But when I looked at Richard, I saw only patience in his eyes, waiting for my decision without pressure. I thought about my baby, about the tiny life growing inside me that deserved stability, safety, and opportunity. I thought about my dwindling savings, my expired lease, and the dozens of rejected applications sitting in my email inbox. I thought about trying to raise a child in some unsafe neighborhood far from decent schools. Always struggling, always afraid. When do you need an answer? There's a charity gala next week, Richard said. A major event with several of the investors I mentioned. If you're going to do this, I'd like you there, but I understand if you need time to think. I'll do it, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the words came out. Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. You're certain? My baby's safety is more important than my pride, I said firmly. If this arrangement gives my child a better start in life, then yes, I'm certain. He extended his hand across the table. Then we have an agreement. I shook his hand. His grip was warm, firm, confident. As our palms touched, I felt that same electric current from yesterday, that pull between omega and alpha that I'd spent years learning to ignore. This was going to be complicated, dangerous even, but I'd made my choice. I'll have my lawyers draw up the contract, Richard said. We'll go over every detail, make sure you're comfortable with all the terms. And Javier? He waited until I met his eyes. Thank you for trusting me. As I left the building and stepped back onto the Manhattan streets, everything looked different. The same city, the same people, but somehow the world had shifted on its axis. I had a home now. Security. I just hoped I hadn't made a terrible mistake. The law offices of Morrison & Associates occupied the 42nd floor of another midtown tower. I sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than my monthly cafe salary, watching as Elizabeth Morrison, Richard's lead attorney, laid out page after page of legal documents. "Let's review the key provisions," Elizabeth said, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She was probably in her late 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun and the kind of confidence that came from decades of high-stakes negotiations. Clause 7 addresses physical boundaries. You'll be required to maintain believable couple behavior in public handholding, standing in close proximity, occasional embraces. However, private intimacy is explicitly not required or expected. Your personal boundaries will be respected at all times. I nodded, scanning the dense legal language. Everything was spelled out in careful detail, leaving no room for misunderstanding or exploitation. It was both reassuring and slightly overwhelming. Clause 12 covers medical care, Elizabeth continued. Mr. Reeves will assume all costs related to your pregnancy. This includes but is not limited to prenatal appointments, medications, hospital delivery, postpartum care, and any emergency medical needs for either you or the infant. You'll have access to Dr. Sarah Martinez at Manhattan Presbyterian. She's one of the best obstetricians in the state, the best doctors, the best hospital, the kind of care I'd only dreamed about during those long nights researching free clinics and charity health programs. My eyes stung, but I blinked the tears back. This was a business arrangement. I couldn't let myself get emotional about it. Richard sat across the conference table, his laptop open, occasionally typing but mostly quiet. He'd changed from his formal suit into charcoal slacks and a navy sweater that somehow made him look more approachable, less like a corporate titan and more like a regular person, though nothing about Richard Reeves was regular. "What about public appearances?" I asked, turning to the next section. "How many events are we talking about?" "Approximately 2 to 3 per week," Elizabeth said. "Some will be brief cocktail receptions, business dinners. Others will be longer affairs like the gala next Saturday. You'll receive a schedule each Monday with the week's commitments, and you have the right to decline any event that conflicts with medical appointments, or if you're not feeling well. Your health takes priority," Richard added, looking up from his laptop. "If you're tired, if you're uncomfortable, we skip the event. No questions asked." I appreciated that, but it also made me wonder about his motives. Why was he being so considerate? Most billionaires I'd read about were demanding, controlling, used to getting exactly what they wanted regardless of who it affected. Richard seemed different, which made me suspicious. People didn't do kind things without expecting something in return. Clause 15, Elizabeth said, drawing my attention back to the documents. Social media and public image. You'll work with a media consultant who will help manage your social presence. Nothing will be posted without your approval, and you retain full control over your personal accounts. The goal is to present authenticity, not manufacture a false persona. "What if someone from my past contacts me?" I asked. "What if my parents see these posts and try to reach out?" Elizabeth exchanged a glance with Richard. "Do you want them to have access to you?" "No," I said immediately. My parents had made their position clear when they'd told me to fix the situation or don't come home. There was no relationship to salvage there. "Then the media team will handle any inquiries," Elizabeth said. "You don't have to respond to anyone you don't want to. In fact, I'd recommend keeping your personal phone number private and using the company phone we'll provide for all contract-related communications." We went through clause after clause: financial stipends, living arrangements, confidentiality agreements, termination conditions. By the time we reached the final page, my head was spinning with legal terminology and implications I was still processing. "Before you sign," Elizabeth said, setting down her pen and looking at me directly, "I want to make sure you understand something. This contract protects both parties, but it particularly protects you. If at any point Mr. Reeves violates these terms, makes you uncomfortable, pressures you into something you didn't agree to, fails to provide the medical care or financial support outlined, you have immediate grounds for termination with full compensation. You're not trapped in this arrangement." I looked at Richard, who met my gaze steadily. "Elizabeth insisted on those protections," he said. "She wanted you to know you have power here. This isn't a situation where I hold all the cards." Something in my chest loosened slightly. The fear I hadn't wanted to acknowledge that I was signing away my autonomy, putting myself at the mercy of a powerful man I barely knew, eased just a fraction. I wasn't powerless. I had legal recourse. I had protection. I picked up the pen, hesitated for just a moment, then signed my name on the final page, Javier Santos. My signature looked small and uncertain next to the bold typeface of the contract header. Richard signed next, his signature confident and practiced. Elizabeth witnessed both, then gathered the documents into a folder. "Congratulations," she said with a professional smile. "You're officially partners." After Elizabeth excused herself to make copies, I found myself alone with Richard in the conference room. The silence felt heavy, weighted with the reality of what we'd just done. I'd signed a contract to pretend to be in love with this man, to attend events on his arm, to smile for cameras, to convince the world we were something we weren't. "Are you having second thoughts?" Richard asked quietly. "I don't know what I'm having," I admitted. "This morning I was a broke cafe worker worried about where I'd sleep next month. Now I'm contracted to be a billionaire's fake boyfriend. It's a lot to process." "We can take it slow," Richard said. "The gala isn't until Saturday. That gives us a week to prepare, to get comfortable with each other. We'll have coaching sessions with the media consultant, practice basic couple interactions, build some rapport so it doesn't feel completely artificial." "Practice couple interactions," I repeated, the words feeling surreal. "Like what? Holding hands? Gazing into each other's eyes?" A hint of amusement touched Richard's face. "Something like that, though I promised to make it as painless as possible." I stood up, suddenly needing to move, to not be sitting in this expensive chair in this expensive office, making decisions that would alter my entire life. I walked to the windows, looking out at the city 42 floors below. From up here, everything looked manageable, orderly, like a well-planned grid. But I knew the truth down there. Life was messy, unpredictable, and often cruel. "Why me?" I asked, not turning around. "You could have hired an actor, someone experienced in this kind of thing. Why choose a random pregnant omega you met on the street?" "Because you're real," Richard said. I heard him stand, heard his footsteps approaching, but he stopped several feet away, respecting my space. "Those investors I mentioned? They can smell fake from a mile away. They've seen countless people try to manipulate them with calculated performances. But you're genuine. Your situation is real. Your emotions are real. That authenticity is exactly what this arrangement needs." I turned to face him. "And after 6 months, when the contract ends and we go our separate ways, won't that raise questions?" "People break up," Richard said with a shrug. "Relationships end. We'll handle it professionally, issue a joint statement about mutual respect and different life paths. By then, I'll have secured the deals I need, and you'll have the foundation to build whatever future you want." It sounded so simple when he explained it. Clinical, businesslike. A transaction with a clear beginning, middle, and end. No complications, no messy emotions, no risk of getting hurt. So why did something in my chest tighten at the thought of walking away from him in 6 months? I pushed the feeling aside. This was survival. This was about giving my baby the best possible start. My feelings didn't matter. "When do we start?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Richard said. "I'll pick you up at 9. We have a meeting with the stylist, then lunch with the media consultant. We'll ease into this, I promise." As I left the building and headed back to my tiny studio apartment for one of the last times, I tried to convince myself I was doing the right thing. That this was just business. That I could keep my emotions separate from the role I'd agreed to play. But deep down, I already knew the truth. This was going to be far more complicated than either of us anticipated. "You look incredible." I stood frozen in the doorway of Richard's penthouse guest room, my reflection in the full-length mirror showing someone I barely recognized. The navy suit had been tailored to perfection, accommodating my growing belly while somehow making me look elegant rather than awkward. My hair had been professionally styled, and the makeup artist had done something subtle with my face that made my features appear sharper, more defined. But underneath all the polish, I was still just the cafe worker, who'd served burnt coffee and survived on tips. Richard stood in the hallway, and when I finally met his eyes, I saw something there that made my breath catch. Not the professional assessment I'd expected, but something warmer, more personal. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him like it had been created specifically for his body, which it probably had. He looked like he belonged on magazine covers, while I looked like I was playing dress-up. I feel like a fraud, I admitted quietly. You're not, he said, stepping closer. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, with me. The limousine ride to the Plaza Hotel felt surreal. Richard briefed me on who would be there, which investors were most important, what topics to avoid. His hand rested on the seat between us, close enough that I could feel its warmth, but not quite touching. What if I say something wrong? I asked, anxiety building in my chest. What if I embarrass you? You won't, Richard said with certainty. Just be yourself. That's all I'm asking. The ballroom took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, their light refracting into thousands of rainbow fragments. A live orchestra played something classical and sophisticated that I couldn't name. People in designer clothes mingled with champagne flutes, their jewelry catching the light with every gesture. This was old money, real power, and I felt completely out of my depth. When we entered hand in hand, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave. Is that Richard's new partner? I heard he's pregnant. How scandalous. Maybe Richard is finally settling down. My grip on Richard's hand tightened involuntarily, panic rising in my throat, but he squeezed back, gentle and reassuring, and leaned down to whisper, I've got you. Just breathe. We moved through the crowd systematically. Richard introduced me to investors, business partners, socialites, each one appraising me with varying degrees of curiosity or judgment. Some were polite, others openly skeptical, but Richard never wavered, never apologized for my presence, never acted like I was anything less than exactly where I belonged. A woman in her 60s approached us, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Mrs. Vanderbilt's. Richard had mentioned her old New York family, influential in financial circles, notoriously difficult to impress. Richard, darling, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she turned to me. And you must be Javier. I've been hearing so much about you. The way she said it made it clear that what she'd heard wasn't flattering. It's nice to meet you, I said, keeping my voice steady. Tell me, Javier, what is it that you do? Professionally speaking, of course. It was a trap designed to expose my lack of pedigree, my unsuitability for Richard's world. I felt Richard tense beside me, ready to intervene, but I spoke first. I worked in food service until recently, I said, meeting her gaze directly. Now I'm focused on preparing for my child. How charming, Mrs. Vanderbilt said, her tone dripping with condescension. Richard always did have such eclectic interests. Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward slightly, positioning himself closer to me in a gesture that was clearly protective. Javier has more integrity and strength than most people in this room, he said, his voice pleasant but with an edge of steel. Those are the qualities I value most. I consider myself extremely fortunate. Mrs. Vanderbilt's smile faltered. She excused herself quickly, disappearing into the crowd. Thank you, I murmured once she was gone. Don't thank me for stating facts, Richard said firmly. She's the one who should be embarrassed, not you. Dinner was served at an elaborately decorated head table. Multiple courses appeared in succession, each more complicated than the last. I tried to remember the etiquette tutorials I'd watched online, praying I wouldn't use the wrong fork or commit some unforgivable social error. Halfway through the main course, Richard quietly reached over and placed an extra portion of vegetables on my plate, along with another piece of salmon. You need to eat more, he said softly, so only I could hear. For the baby, it was such a small gesture, but it felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with our contract. He was taking care of me not because anyone was watching but because he genuinely cared. After dessert, the orchestra transitioned to something slower, and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Richard stood and extended his hand. I should warn you, I said nervously. I've never really learned how to dance properly. Then let me teach you, he said. Trust me. On the dance floor, Richard positioned his hands carefully, one at my waist, the other holding my hand, and began to move. I stumbled at first, but he guided me patiently, his movements smooth and confident. Stop thinking so much, he murmured near my ear, his breath warm against my skin. Just follow my lead. Gradually I relaxed into the rhythm. His alpha pheromones surrounded me, making my omega instincts hyper-aware of every point of contact between our bodies. The rest of the ballroom faded away until it felt like we were the only two people in existence. "Does this feel like pretending to you?" I asked quietly, the question escaping before I could stop it. Richard's gray eyes met mine, and the intensity in them made my heart stutter. "No," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "This feels more real than anything else in my life." The song ended, but Richard didn't immediately let go. His hand remained at my waist, his thumb brushing against the fabric of my suit jacket. Around us, people were applauding the orchestra, but I barely heard it. "Everyone's watching us," I whispered. "Let them watch," Richard said. Then slowly and deliberately he leaned forward and pressed his forehead against mine. The gesture was intimate, possessive, a public declaration that went far beyond what our contract required. Camera flashes exploded around us. Tomorrow this photo would be everywhere. Magazines, social media, gossip columns, evidence of our relationship. Proof that billionaire Richard Reeves had found someone worth claiming in front of New York's elites. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about the contract or the cameras or the scandal. I was thinking about how safe I felt in Richard's arms. How valued. How terrifyingly easy it would be to forget that this was all temporary. 6 months. That's what we'd agreed to. But as Richard finally, reluctantly released me and we left the dance floor together, I realized with a sinking feeling that 6 months might not be nearly enough time, and that scared me more than anything else. The morning started like any other over the past 2 weeks. I woke up in Richard's penthouse guest room, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Central Park. Richard had already left for an early meeting, leaving a note on the kitchen counter next to a breakfast he'd prepared: fresh fruit, whole grain toast, and a protein smoothie. I managed 3 bites before the dizziness hit. The room tilted sideways, and I grabbed the counter to steady myself. My vision blurred at the edges, black spots dancing across my field of view. I made it to the couch before my legs gave out completely. That's where Richard found me when he returned unexpectedly, slumped against the cushions, trying to breathe through the nausea. "Javier!" He was at my side instantly, his hand on my forehead checking for fever. "How long have you been feeling like this?" "Just now," I managed. I stood up too fast, I think. But Richard was already pulling out his phone, dialing with quick, decisive movements. "We're going to the doctor. Now. It's probably nothing. We're not taking chances," he said, his tone brooking no argument. At the clinic, Dr. Martinez, the obstetrician Richard's insurance had connected me with, ran a battery of tests: blood pressure, urine sample, blood work. Richard sat beside me the entire time, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. When Dr. Martinez returned, her expression was serious. "Your blood pressure is significantly elevated. We're looking at early-stage preeclampsia." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. "But I feel fine," I protested weakly. "Mostly fine. That's the dangerous part," Dr. Martinez explained. "Symptoms can be subtle until they're not. Have you been under stress? Any major life changes recently?" I almost laughed. Major life changes? I'd gone from homeless and desperate to living in a billionaire's penthouse while pretending to be in a relationship that felt increasingly less fake with each passing day. Stress didn't begin to cover it. Some, I admitted. Dr. Martinez folded her hands on her desk. "Strict bed rest. No exceptions. You need to minimize physical activity and eliminate stressors as much as possible. This condition can become life-threatening very quickly, both for you and the baby." The drive back to Richard's building was silent. I could feel tension radiating from him, see the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as he processed the diagnosis. "You're moving into the penthouse permanently," he said as we pulled into the parking garage. It wasn't a question. "I already am in the penthouse," I pointed out. "The guest room." "You're alone there when I'm at work," Richard interrupted. "If something happens, if you need help." He stopped, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I can't risk it." "I won't. The contract said we'd maintain separate spaces." I reminded him, though the argument felt hollow even as I made it. "Forget the contract," Richard said sharply. "This is about your safety. About our baby's safety." "Our baby." The way he said it made something warm and dangerous bloom in my chest. The penthouse felt different after that conversation. Richard hired a nurse to check on me daily. He rearranged his schedule to work from home more often. He cooked breakfast every morning, checked in via text every hour, and came home early every evening with some excuse about finishing work remotely. I should have felt smothered. Instead, I felt cherished. One evening, I was lying in bed, unable to sleep despite exhaustion. The baby had been active all day, movements growing stronger and more frequent. I pressed my hand against my belly, feeling the flutter and kick beneath my palm, and smiled despite everything. A soft knock on my door. "Can I come in?" Richard stood in the doorway wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, the most casual I'd ever seen him. His hair was slightly mussed, like he'd been running his hands through it. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "The baby's decided now is a great time for gymnastics," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Richard's expression softened. "Is it? Can you feel it moving?" "Yeah. It's getting stronger every day." He hesitated, and I saw something vulnerable flash across his face. Would it be okay if I— He didn't finish the question, but I understood. My heart hammered as I pulled back the covers slightly and nodded. Richard sat carefully on the edge of the bed, giving me space to change my mind. When I didn't pull away, he reached out slowly and placed his hand on my stomach. We waited. Seconds stretched into a full minute, and I started to worry the baby had fallen asleep. Then a strong kick right against Richard's palm. His eyes went wide with wonder. "Oh my God, pretty amazing, right?" I whispered. "Incredible," he breathed. His hand remained on my belly, warm and steady. Then he looked up at me, and the intensity in his gray eyes made it hard to breathe. "Xavier, I need to tell you something." "Okay?" I said, though my voice came out barely audible. "This arrangement we made, this contract, it was supposed to be simple, professional, a business transaction that benefited us both." He paused, his thumb unconsciously tracing small circles on my stomach. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fake for me. My heart stopped. "Richard, I know it's complicated," he continued, words coming faster now like he'd been holding them in too long. "I know it violates the terms we agreed to. But I can't keep pretending anymore. I care about you, Javier. Really care about you. It's become the most real thing in my life." Tears pricked at my eyes. "I care about you too," I admitted, the confession both terrifying and liberating. "But what happens when the 6 months end? When we're supposed to go our separate ways?" "We don't," Richard said simply. "We tear up that contract and write a new agreement. One that doesn't have an expiration date." "What about your business? The investors?" "I'll figure it out," he said with more confidence than I felt. "But I can't lose you. I won't." He leaned forward slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to say no, to remind him of the boundaries we'd established. Instead, I closed the distance between us and pressed my lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like the passionate embraces in movies. It was careful and sweet and felt like coming home. When we pulled apart, Richard rested his forehead against mine. "Stay with me," he murmured. "Really stay, not because of a contract, but because you want to." "I want to," I whispered back. That night, Richard fell asleep in my bed, his arm draped protectively over me, and our baby. For the first time since I'd discovered I was pregnant, I felt completely safe, completely certain that everything would be okay. I should have known it was too perfect to last. The headline appeared 3 days later, splashed across every tabloid and gossip website in New York. "Marcus Kane returns. Richard Reeves's ex-fiancée back in the city." I stared at my phone screen, my stomach churning. The article featured photos of Richard with another alpha, stunningly handsome, impeccably dressed, radiating confidence and privilege, Marcus Kane. They looked perfect together in the images, like they'd been designed to complement each other. Nothing like me. The article detailed their relationship, 3 years together, engaged, planning a wedding. Then Marcus had vanished without explanation, leaving Richard to deal with the social fallout alone. And now he was back, allegedly looking to reconnect with his former fiancée. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked when Richard came home that evening. He stopped in the doorway, his face falling when he saw what I was holding. "Because it's ancient history. Irrelevant." 3 years engaged isn't irrelevant," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He was important to you." "He was a mistake," Richard said harshly, moving into the room. "Marcus cheated on me, humiliated me publicly, and then disappeared when I needed him most. There's nothing there worth discussing." But before I could respond, the penthouse intercom buzzed. Security calling up. "Mr. Reeves? There's a Marcus Kane here to see you." Should I send him up? Richard's jaw clenched. No, tell him to leave. He says it's urgent. About the Wellington contract. Richard closed his eyes briefly and I saw the conflict on his face. The Wellington contract was worth millions. I'd heard him discussing it on phone calls. Fine, send him up, but tell security to stand by. Marcus Kane in person was even more imposing than his photos suggested. He swept into the penthouse like he owned it. Designer suit perfectly pressed. Expensive cologne filling the air. His eyes found me immediately, and I saw the calculation there. Richard, he said warmly, as if they were old friends. It's been too long. Then to me, and you must be Javier. Congratulations on the pregnancy. How far along are you? 4 months, I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Fascinating, Marcus said, though his tone suggested it was anything but. Richard, we need to talk. Privately. Anything you need to say can be said in front of Javier. Richard replied coldly. Marcus's smile sharpened. If you insist, I've been doing some research into your recent lifestyle changes. The sudden relationship, the pregnant omega, the image rehabilitation. It's quite clever, actually. The investors eat it up. Stable alpha, family man, traditional values. Great for business. My blood ran cold. What are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Marcus said pleasantly. I'm stating facts. This is a contractual arrangement designed to improve Richard's public image. 6 months of playing house, then you disappear with a nice payout. It's business, nothing personal. Get out, Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. Now, but Marcus wasn't finished. He turned to me, his eyes cruel. You really think you belong in this world? Look at yourself. You're a charity case he picked up off the street. When this contract expires, you'll go back to serving coffee and he'll find someone actually worthy of the Reeves name. Richard moved fast, grabbing Marcus by the collar and physically pushing him toward the door. If you ever speak to him like that again, I will destroy you. Professionally, personally, completely. Do you understand me? Marcus raised his hands in mock surrender. Message received. But Javier, when this falls apart, remember I warned you. The door slammed behind him and silence filled the penthouse. Don't listen to him, Richard said immediately, turning to me. Everything he said was lies designed to hurt us both. But the poison had already taken root. Was he lying about the contract? I asked quietly. About this being a business arrangement? It started that way, Richard admitted. But you know it's not that anymore. You know what we have is real. Do I? I stood up, suddenly exhausted and overwhelmed. Because Marcus made some good points. I don't belong here, Richard. I'm not part of your world. Maybe when reality sets in. Stop, Richard said firmly. Just stop. He pulled out his phone and made a call, putting it on speaker. Elizabeth? I need you to terminate the investor agreement. Yes. The entire thing. I'll explain later, but it needs to happen today. I heard Elizabeth's confused voice on the other end. Richard, that contract is worth, I don't care. Cancel it. And draw up a press release announcing that my relationship with Javier is genuine, not contractual. I want it explicitly stated that I'm in love with him. He ended the call and looked at me. There, the contract that Marcus was so concerned about, gone. I'm risking major business deals, potential investor backlash, possible stock value drops. Because you are worth more than all of it. Tears streamed down my face. Richard, I'm not finished, he said. And to my shock, he dropped to one knee. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. I bought this last week. I was waiting for the right moment, but I realize now that the right moment is when I stop being afraid and start being honest. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver band with a sapphire. My favorite color, something I'd mentioned once in passing. Javier Santos, I am completely, irrevocably in love with you. I want to raise this baby together. I want to build a life together. I want to stop pretending any of this was ever fake, because from the moment I saw you on that sidewalk, something in me recognized you. Will you marry me? For real? I couldn't speak through the tears, so I just nodded. Richard slid the ring onto my finger, then stood and pulled me carefully into his arms. I promise you, he murmured against my hair, you will never doubt your place in my life again. The weeks that followed were challenging. Richard's announcement caused exactly the chaos he'd predicted. Angry investors, concerned board members, Media frenzy. His company's stock did drop temporarily, but it also brought unexpected support. Progressive investors reached out, interested in working with someone who valued authenticity over appearances. The public response was mixed, but surprisingly positive. People were tired of fake celebrity relationships. They wanted something real. Marcus attempted one more smear campaign through the media, but Richard's lawyers shut it down with a restraining order and threatened legal action. And through it all, my baby continued to grow. Delivery day arrived in early summer. Richard held my hand through every contraction, every push, every moment of fear and pain and exhaustion. When our daughter finally arrived, healthy, perfect, screaming her arrival to the world, Richard cried openly. "She's beautiful," he whispered, cradling her with surprising confidence. "Just like her father." "Fathers," I corrected, exhausted but happy. "She has two of us now." 6 months later, the adoption papers were finalized. Richard was legally, officially our daughter's parents. His company had not only recovered but thrived, and we had moved into a house in Brooklyn, with a yard, a nursery, and enough space for the family we were building. The rejection that had seemed so devastating, Tom's discrimination, Marcus's cruelty, society's judgment, had led me exactly where I needed to be. Sometimes the universe's worst moments are actually pointing you toward your best life.